everyone. Thanks for coming back to another episode of the TechDecisions podcast. Today's guest is Garten, the Chief Technology Officer for NTT Ltd, a top managed service provider. We talk about how the cybersecurity landscape is shifting in 2022 and beyond, changes in ransomware and malware, the cybersecurity skills gap, and how the public sector is helping the private sector combat cybercrime. Before we get to Greg, here's a quick reminder to subscribe to the podcast to hear weekly interviews with IT experts that can help you make the right technology decisions for your organization. And now here's Garten. All right, so we now welcome on Garten, the Chief Technology Officer for NTT Security. Greg, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So Greg, we're talking about cybersecurity trends in 2022 after kind of a crazy year for InfoSec folks. So how do you see the cybersecurity landscape shifting in 2022? You know, how will it evolve from 2021?
I think that we're going to definitely see more of supply chain related issues. It's kind of becoming, the big catch-all phrase for a lot of issues that have been in the making for a really long time. And so I think it seems like the definition of what is a supply chain related cybersecurity issue is constantly expanding. So I think it's going to be more of that.
So more SolarWinds, more Log4j, more Kaseya.
I think not necessarily more of those vectors, but
but similar. Right.
Similar, yeah. There's so much like computing infrastructure that's supporting what we now kind of people who had never used the phrase supply chain are now using that they're understanding what it makes up supply chain. So kind of like in the software world where you have technical debt and infrastructure technical debt that you take on, sometimes knowingly, sometimes not knowingly. In the cybersecurity world, I think a lot of the problems that have basically been security debt are now coming to the forefront. And so I think it's simultaneously, there's also going to be a lot of new vectors around, cloud native, and as people with the big push of digitization, that's happening, and the digital transformation that was kind of forced upon everybody. It was kind of in the fledgling stages before COVID, but it kind of, really went out there at COVID with everybody being a remote worker. So I think there's a lot of areas around SASE and remote workers that are going to be uncovered and have to be dealt with.
So I've seen that over the last maybe 2 months. Ransomware has slowed a bit. Is that what you guys are seeing? And or what do you think we're in store for when it comes to ransomware this year?
I think, ransomware, we're not really seeing we're seeing an evolution of it. I wouldn't quite call it a slowing, which kind of gives a connotate, like an impression that, we can kind of ease off the pedal on it, but that's not true. It's getting more sophisticated. I mean, a lot of these vectors that the ransomware is taking advantage of have been there for a really long time. And so the kind of moral of the story is that we can't, as an industry, kind of sit idly by and kind of be happy about the achievements that we've made, instead of focusing on what we're doing going forward. And I've seen some of that in the industry, and I think we need to change that. And I think enterprises as well, are now going to be blending the security aspects that are being exposed by ransomware with things like privacy, because one thing that people think of kind of as an afterthought to ransomware is all that data is actually being exfiltrated somewhere in a lot of cases, not all cases. A lot of cases it's just being encrypted locally, but it's being exfiltrated as well, because that's still happening. And in addition, like prior to it being encrypted. And so that's information from people and processes and business IP.
So we've already hit on two big bullet points, supply chain attacks and ransomware. What aren't enough people talking about when it comes to cyber attacks? What's flying under the radar?
I think the vendors, unfortunately, are in a lot of cases confusing the enterprises with acronyms. So like XDR, next gen SIM. I mean, we have this tendency to like bolt next gen on front of everything and say that it's new when it really is just rebranded. And so I think that the people are trying to the vendors are trying to get everybody into their one ecosystem, and that's proven time and time again that you really need to take more of a best of breed approach. And that isn't necessarily like, let's just pick the best in every category, but it's really looking at like what your business is and what you do in order to pick the best fit for what your business is and what you're trying to achieve. Even if we were able to provide businesses the best security and protection in the world, they themselves are going to have varying degrees of appetite for risk. And some businesses are going to look at cybersecurity issue as more of an enabler for their business by mitigating the risk and understanding the risk, having visibility into it, where others are going to be very risk averse and just want to be like, I want guaranteed that I want protected. And they're both legitimate views, but clearly the ones that look at leveraging cybersecurity as an enabler for their business as opposed to just something we have to bolt on, I think are going to be more successful.
So, these cyber attacks will, continue, and, while the cybersecurity skills gap remains. So how, are we addressing this, and are we doing enough to address it?
It's a good point. I mean, it's ever since I've been in cybersecurity, which has been a while, the skills gap has always been an issue, and that's always been a talking point about outsourcing to companies and providers that have that kind of a collection of skills that an enterprise otherwise wouldn't be able to obtain or wouldn't want to because it's not their core business. It's really a lot of the processes and the things that humans would normally do in security I see a ramp up and acceleration of automation around that in order to address in a way the skills gap as well. So for example, being able to stitch together the entire timeline of an event, from the point when the first request comes in to the point when the final transaction of that endpoint that's doing the request, when it completes, and that traverses so many networks, so many different technologies, and being able to stitch all that together is very laborious. And SIMs have taken an approach of trying to do that, but they've really failed. I mean, the concept of failed SIM implementations is as prevalent as failed ERP implementations these days. And so being able to stitch all that together in a very automated fashion so that you can mitigate the risk associated with the skills gap, I think we're going to see a lot of that. I think a lot more use of machine learning, not just in a marketing context, but in a practical context of, trying to not necessarily repeat exactly what a human would do. Like you're not going to have this, mythical ML model that's going to replace people. I mean, there might be one or two occasions where that's the case, but for the most part, that's not true. It's going to be assistive for them. So you could have fewer people actually doing more advanced activities because a lot of the basic, grunt work is being done by engines that are being taught continually and improving. And that I think we're going to see an acceleration of that this year.
So as one of the reasons that cybersecurity has been in the headlines, pretty much every day for the last 2 years is, largely due to remote work and just that elimination of the IT perimeter. So, do you think we're getting a grip on securing, this distributed work model, and because remote work isn't going away anytime soon. So are we any closer to getting a grip on that?
I think we're closer from a pure incremental improvement standpoint, but I still think we have a tremendous ways to go. With the kind of the evolution of SD-WAN over into SASE and the remote workers, and pushing more stuff out to the edge is a good start at addressing those issues, because the remote workers really haven't been addressed in a holistic manner previously, and that's one of the attempts of SASE and all of the ecosystem that goes around that. But I also see a lot of vendors bolting on older technologies, relabeling them and bolting them on and saying, we have the perfect solution for, all scenarios. You just need to come to us and that's it. And vendors, they come and go, but they also, leapfrog each other in terms of capabilities over time. And enterprises, it's very hard to keep up with that with the enterprises. So, again, stitching all that together to where you can see that activity, not just say, well, they're outside of my perimeter, they're in front of my moat, so I can't see them and I can't, help them. I think we need to have the same level of visibility, the same level of detection, and the same level of response capability, irrespective of where you are. I mean, one of the original, back 20 plus years ago when I was on a project, we were developing a infrastructure for a managed service provider for doing distributed management, because the teams were all over the world. Our goal was that, from like a Starbucks, it sounds horrible today, but from a Starbucks, if there was like a disaster, they'd be able to continue work there in a protected manner, multi-factor authentication, encryption, everything else. And that was kind of the goal, rather than trying to think, oh, well, now that we've built this perfect, moat around everything, let's just, try and extend the moat. It doesn't work that way. So things like micro segmentation at the application level, application awareness,
Right.
Those are going to be really important, because you're really mitigating your risk associated with any one particular application being compromised, or constraining a bad actor from spreading widely throughout an organization.
I think we've taken a big chunk out of the awareness problem. I think just the sheer volume of incidents the last 2 years has helped in that regard. I mean, like I said before, it's in the news almost every day now, and I think that actually helps spread awareness of it.
I think so. Sorry to interrupt, but I'd also,
no, yeah, please.
It has the effect of like a numbing effect with people as well. And
right.
I think that's really bad because people
right.
get desensitized to it, and it just becomes kind of a, this is expected. And I don't think it should be expected. It's very, yeah, people think, oh, well, that business got hacked, that's a shame. You really need to contextualize it in terms of the person as well. So whether your data was, used, because everybody's using apps nowadays in order to do, Instacart, Uber Eats, localized apps, and all this private data is going out, whether it's credit card information or personal information. And so you really need to, I think if people more contextualized it and applied it to like their own data, as opposed to just thinking there's this thing that's happening to somebody else. And, the result is I'm seeing higher gas prices because the pipeline OT network was shut down, in a particular region.
Right.
They need to think like, hey, that actually has cascading impacts on it. And that desensitization is, making that difficult to provide that context.
Right. So how do you keep, how do you keep cybersecurity fresh in people's minds? How do you prevent them from getting, kind of burnt out on it?
I believe it's really about when we as cybersecurity professionals, rather than trying to take this purist, almost 100% technical view at solving a cybersecurity problem, we need to put it in terms, not just in explanation, but also in practice, that people understand in their day-to-day lives. So I'll give you an example. People who use Google's Nest, for the thermostat, right? They're very used to using the app now. They, online using the website in order to change their temperatures. There's the integration with the cameras, and it's, swipe, 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 you're done. And so it's easy to do. But when you flip over to the enterprise side, all of a sudden it's, this thing that people go, ooh, this is really difficult and complex. And so I think if it's more simplification of our industry in terms that the average person who's in the enterprise can relate to, we're going to get better engagement. And when you get better engagement, you can do things like, user awareness for like malware campaigns, not in, very technical terms, because, I'm sure a lot of enterprises, they have training programs for their employees. Like once a year, they have to go through information security training and things like, don't click on this link, don't, download this file, don't do whatever, best practice stuff. But it's more of a chore because I don't think it's being related in terms that they can understand in their day-to-day life. So if we try to become more friendly in that sense and adapt our technologies to and how people use our technologies and our services, I think that's actually going to go a long way.
Right. I mean, it's kind of a phrase that you've probably heard a million times, that end users don't care how things work.
Yes.
As long as they work and keep them safe, they don't care about the technical details.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fact that that most times people are going to choose convenience over quality. I mean, it's a human trait. I mean, of course you want both, but when it comes down to it, people are going to choose convenience, and so we should take that that lesson and try and make our industry more relatable and easier to use.
So I also want to talk about the role that the U.S. government is playing. So I think they've been very involved via executive orders. Is it CISA or CISA? How do you pronounce that acronym?
I've heard both.
All right, so let's go with CISA because that's what I heard Krebs say on the news one time.
Okay.
So like I said, the government's been very active. CISA has been extremely active. Biden has released, a few executive orders addressing cybersecurity in the government. Do you think, at the very least, I think these efforts are setting a certain tone, and apparently they convinced Russia to arrest our evil folks. Is it also Revel or our evil? I don't know.
Again, I've gotten out of the acronym, the name correction game.
Yeah. So those guys, are allegedly being charged with crimes, and that was possibly at the urging of the U.S. government. So do you think these efforts are making any kind of a sizable impact?
I really think more effort needs to be focused on the early prevention and rather than headlines after the fact. I mean, it's nice to know that these type of things are happening after the fact, but it's really not. The typical line is we're going to make an example out of somebody to discourage others to do it. I don't see that happening in cybersecurity because it doesn't discourage anybody. And whether it's a nation state, it sure wouldn't discourage a nation state, or it's organized crime groups. They don't care. There's enough people out there and enough opportunity to where it's still worthwhile. So again, while it's good from raising a visibility perspective, I really think there needs to be more focus on what do you do from a foundational perspective in order to try and either prevent or at least compartmentalize the risk that's associated with cybersecurity. And I do see some of that in terms of like the zero trust announcement and the encouragement that's coming out of the government and stuff. And that's a good start. But what's going to happen now is a bunch of vendors are just going to be, we're zero trust. And that's not necessarily the solution.
Yeah. I think we're already kind of seeing that.
We are, and that they you ask 6 different people what zero trust means and you get 7 different answers.
Right. Yeah, Greg, anything else that IT folks need to look out for this year and beyond, when it comes to attack vectors or any other cybersecurity topics?
I think I really encourage collaboration among within and across industry, and especially at the cybersecurity level. There's been some good efforts made to for industries to get together and try and share information like threat intelligence and tactics and stuff like that. And I would like to see a lot more of that. I'd like to see industry step up more in a formal manner and encourage that and kind of break the barriers down between the communication, because there's still it's taboo, right, to talk about what's happening within a company for their security. And I think we need to kind of open our our kimono and be like, hey, this is what's happening on my side. What are you seeing? And like in my role as CTO of a large security services provider, we are in a way, helping our clients do that because we're crossing industries and being able to, facilitate that collaboration by way of our services to them. But I would like to see independent of that, that there be more of that. I'm hoping that I'm seeing more movement. I'm hoping it gets accelerates even more.
Actually, that brings up another thing that I wanted to ask you about. So I've written about this a couple of times, just burnout, not just cybersecurity, but IT as well. I think that's a huge issue, and just retaining talent. When you have it, and then juxtapose that with this skills gap that we have in security. Um, you know, some best practices to find and retain that talent when you actually can't find it.
It's a good point. It's like, the old phrase, alert fatigue, and incident fatigue, and kind of, thing. Again, this kind of relates to my point around, desensitization, because it happens so often. Just with any industry, just the repetitive nature of what's happening in cybersecurity, whether it's alert management or, data classification, things like that. We really need to leverage more automation and more, intelligence around the automation, not just, repetitive, press this button, press this button. I mean, clearly those things need to be automated, but even being able to assist people in making their decisions so they're not having to, analyze the same thing over and over again, because it's all about patterns and being able to identify the patterns and the deviation within the patterns, still keep it within identification.
Right.
So it really, that to address that issue of the burnout, I think there needs to be kind of an elevation of people's thinking, and let's get the cybersecurity professionals into a higher order of thinking across the board, and more into the business processes, as opposed to just these security whiz kids that are coming in and saying, I can help secure you. It's like, well, you need to understand the business in order to actually help secure you. And that understanding of the business, I think, will help ultimately reduce the fatigue on the cybersecurity professionals that are doing day in, day out work.
Right. I think that's true for really any kind of internal IT position. There's more integration between the tech side of things and the business side of things.
Correct. Yeah. AI ops, the other, area, it's very similar, right? It's not just, automating a repetitive task, but it's introducing intelligence into the automation. And it's all in support of getting, your resources to be, more thinkers, as opposed to just, pressing a button all the time.
Very good, Greg. Thanks very much. I appreciate your time.